Welcome to the weekly swing low. It's May 4th, 2025. And as we've been talking about the last few weeks, we are getting strong signs of a bottom, but it is a process. We have to see one swing low at a time. And most importantly, that monthly swing low. And right now for the SPY, that means above 567.42. We talked about this, right? We're not quite there yet, right? Like we did poke above it at some point. Actually, we are slightly above. I think we're where do we close? We are just below there. For QQQ, we're actually there, and you'll see that. We'll go to that ticker next. But that's important. That's your next really important level. And then right above there, the swing high that started this cascade lower, that is active below 580.69. So said a different way, this candle, so that happened back in February, that marked the high, right? The low of that candle is that 580.69 level. So once price closed below that, that made this a swing high and we started a downtrend on the monthly chart. That downtrend seems to be short-lived. We're now making a higher high. This is how simple you can think about the price action, right? Now the catch is when we zoom in, we've been rallying for like 9 days straight, or like just 9 green days in a row, I should say. So a pullback probably is coming, and so a better tactical entry is coming. But it's very simple. You want to see price trade above 567.42 and remain up there. We will almost certainly get a retrace back towards that level. That'll give you another buying opportunity. But these are signs of a long-term bottom forming. And the great thing is that this could happen in the midst of a lot of bearishness, which will just be all the more fuel for the rally. So let's zoom in on the daily. So on the daily chart, Friday was day 18, right, making a higher. So that's important, right? That means we've already been rallying for 18 days, which is not a short amount of time by any means, right? Like this rally topped out on day 25, this topped out on day 23. This was longer, topped out on day 29, but you could see we had these pretty big pullbacks in the middle. This topped out on day 19. All that to say, it's not like this rally started yesterday. So at some point we're going to get a daily cycle decline, and I could see a world where we get that like in late May, around when people start panicking about the debt ceiling and all that stuff. So I could see a world where we continue to rise. Also remember we have FOMC next week. That could be a time when that could be your catalyst for the swing high that starts a daily cycle decline. The point, though, is that that decline should be viable if we have a long-term bottom. And it's going to be important to see where that settles out. Like that's going to really tell you, do we have that long-term bottom? In terms of like structurally, the next kind of upside target is taking out this high. You can just kind of see that, right? Like this was your last high. This was your short little rally that lasted 8 days. And then we declined for what is that, like 9 days, but like a really steep decline, obviously. So that level is 576. And if you look at the weekly chart, right, it corresponds with this level here. Again, makes perfect sense. You can kind of see it structurally. So price could get all the way back there, and that could become our lower high and then come back down. So we're not out of the woods by any means. But again, as if we were to recapture that level, that would obviously mean we'd be appreciably above here, this making this a monthly swing high or swing low. We have to close the month that way. Obviously, there's a lot of trading to happen. But let's look at what the quarterly candle looks like. Look at this thing. Look at the quarterly candle. I mean, that's why you have to look at these higher time frames. This is a setup. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but this is a setup for a bullish outside candle, right? We made a lower low, a massive lower low. And the funny thing is, the quarter before that was actually a bearish outside candle. I want to just make sure that we're like everybody's clear on that, right? So the Q1 candle, because we got our top in February, right? We just talked about that. We looked at that on the weekly chart, or maybe it was the daily chart. It made a higher high above the Q4 candle and then closed as a lower low. And then we got slammed coming into this quarter. Again, that crash, that big wick that we're looking at, this is that wick on the quarterly chart. Look how bullish this looks. Now, we still have 2 months to trade in the quarter, right? We have to trade. Actually, wait, is that right? Um, so obviously a lot of trading to happen, just like the monthly candle has a lot of time to close. But this is your setup for this to make a higher high, which just is another way of saying this makes another all-time high. But that would be a crazy spate of volatility where we have a bearish outside candle for on the quarterly chart, followed by a bullish outside candle on the quarterly chart. Wow, that would be really interesting. And wouldn't it be nice to make a lot of money in that process? So like, pay attention to this as it's forming. There's going to be wiggles and wobbles inside, but look at this candle, my friends. Um, and this means the annual candle is still red, I believe. This thing is freezing on me. Yeah, so it's still red. This thing goes green above 587 because that's where we opened on the year. So you want to watch for that as well, just to kind of tell you how things look kind of on the longer term. And so, like, short term, I could see a world where this rally, and again, we have FOMC coming up on Wednesday, so we probably drift higher into that. But like, structurally speaking, think about this rally. So like, from there to there. So this was a bullish outside weekly candle, and then we got followed through last week, right? So this whole rally, call it 60 points, right? So a 50% retracement of that rally, which would not even be bearish, it would just be kind of standard garden variety. That gets you down 30 points. And again, we could rally more, so these levels are going to change, but that gets you down to there. Like, that's not, and that is like, again, just kind of perfectly healthy. Imagine price doing something like this, right? Like, just think of, like, look at this structurally, what's happening, right? So right, like, we think about it like this, and then price would do something like that, and then, right, like in an uptrend, there are higher lows, which means there are pullbacks. They're unavoidable. Like I talked about the daily cycle decline. Like we're gonna get that at some point, and so that could be that 50% retracement. It doesn't even have to be a 50% retracement. It just gives you a little bit of a ballpark. And so you want to watch for that. Again, that's going to be a buying opportunity. In terms of the weekly, we're on week 3, and this is a really short cycle. Or excuse me, the previous cycle was really short at 12 weeks. But be mindful, right? This is week 3. You want to start watching as the weeks go on. The previous cycle topped out on week 5. That was a very bearish cycle, obviously. The one before that topped out on week 17, week 13, week 22, week 19. So we could have some nice upside in front of us, even if it's just like a 10-week cycle or a 10-week rally, right? That's still, another 7 weeks of upside. But again, think about the fact that there's going to be a higher low within this rally at some point. That is the S&P. In terms of like your downside, what you want to watch for, you want to, like, is that a gap? I think that might be. I know there's definitely a gap within the NASDAQ, so I'm guessing that there's also a gap here. Yep. Yeah, that's a gap. So there's a little gap here. So, I mean, price could even come all the way back down to here. And then we're talking like short-term pullbacks, not even a full daily cycle decline. You could even see price come all the way down to here, like 557, like a mini retracement kind of thing. Um, so that's SPY. Let's move on to the other tickers. We'll go quicker. Same idea. Just, the price action is a little like the Qs are leading SPY, right? Like we talked about. Let's go to the monthly chart. Turn this into a monthly, and then boom. You see that? Look at that beautiful line. In fact, we are actually like the low for this month so far. And again, we've only traded like a couple days, but the low is actually above the high from last month. And very, very bullish, and looking to take out the high of this candle next, right? Which is 512. And so the ratio of QQQ to SPY is also starting to move up. If you look at this weekly chart, look at that, right? Like starting a new weekly cycle rally, if you will. And let's just go to the Q's absolute chart, back to that. It's the same picture though structurally. This is day 18. For the Q's, that next upside target, you probably see some resistance is around 493.62. That's this little high here. But again, same kind of idea for the Qs. At some point, we're going to retrace this rally, and let's just put some numbers to it. So this is 62 points. So if we dropped 30, something like 32, 30 points, that gets you back to like 457, 458, something like that. Again, numbers are going to change in real time, but that's just, something to kind of keep in mind, just like think of it as like a template. At some point, we are going to get a daily cycle decline. And for the Qs, we have a bigger gap. So you can see there's this gap from down here to here. So the bottom of this here is 480.74, and here is so it's a gap between 480.74 and 477. So something like $3. Pretty decent sized gap there. So that would be your downside target, some kind of gap fill. And there's another gap down here. So that'll be interesting to see if that gets filled. So that's below between 452.88 and 447.58. That's much lower. That's something that maybe we hit as part of our daily cycle decline. And then you look at the Dow. So the Dow is one of the weakest of them all. It is furthest from making a monthly swing low. So the Dow has to trade above 423.44. So you want to watch for that level. That will give you a monthly swing low. Again, QQQ is already there. So to be clear, for QQQ, it needs to stay above 479.56 to maintain that monthly swing low and that long-term bottom potential. And for the Qs, it's the same thing. If you look at the quarterly, you have a big bullish hammer again, setting up. The way this pattern generally works is the more into this range we get, right, the more likely we're going to just fill the range and make a higher high above here, which again, in this case, would mean making new all-time highs, making this a long-term bottom. No way to know how much upside we get after that all-time high, but that's the implication. So that's the Qs. And IWM, also notable, this thing is waking up. So IWM also needs a little bit of work to get that monthly swing low. So it needs to trade above 203.33 for that monthly swing. And for the IWM, in terms of downside, you could easily see a move down to, like, let's say 189 on a pullback. The thing that to note about IWM, look at this long-term monthly chart of IWM versus SPY. What do you notice? It is literally making all-time lows recently, and we now have this May candle is green for the first time in a bit. So we are entering a period where IWM is starting to outperform SPY. That's important. That's usually bullish for the market, just like when QQQ is outperforming SPY. So that's important. That's your chance to take. That's your opportunity to kind of take your shot. This is how it looks on a daily chart. You can see just held this little low here. TNA is the bullish, is the leveraged IWM play. So for TNA, it needs to trade above $30.90 to make that monthly swing. And we're here at 27.64. So you have some upside even to get to that, right? And this is, looking like some nice price action here. Okay, so that's small caps. Let's move on to semiconductors. So same identical picture, day 18. You can kind of see it's all the same structure. We're consolidating a little bit above the highs of this candle. That's bullish because we needed to get out of the range of this candle. And now we're consolidating above the highs. For SMH, do we have our monthly swing? Oh, yes, we do, my friends. So above 216.61 is a monthly swing. And importantly, again, as a reminder, SMH, the semiconductors, actually topped out back in July. The swing high is active below 227. So we have to cross above there to, like, that's our next big zone, right? And then, right, really getting above this candle is going to be important as well, which is 235. But you can see this candle, the July candle, is what marks the high. We spent a lot of time essentially trading inside the range of that candle before breaking down. Now we're going to test it from below. Incredibly important. But we're going to see, again, there's still some upside So we could still catch some upside. This thing could still bump its head and then make lower lows. But those are going to be the levels that you want to watch. And in terms of your short term, you can kind of see right here on this 15-minute chart. Look at this little rally, and a lot of the indices are looking very similar. We we rallied, these little 15-minute candles, and now we're kind of petering out. And so you want to see if price can defend this rally. So somewhere around 217.60, 217 and a half in that neighborhood. If it can't, then we probably work our way down into like the 212 area. These are all 50. This is all like a day of price action, or a few days of price action, I should say, in 15-minute charts. You can kind of see it. It's like, oh, price rolled over, but then we gapped up, and then it's starting to roll over. Let's see if it can hold or give us some kind of false breakdown. And in terms of SMH versus SPY, are we seeing some outperformance? Yes, we are. Look at that monthly swing. Look at that thing. So this thing topped out. We talked about this last update. The ratio of SPY to QQQ to SPY, SMH to SPY topped out in June, whereas SMH itself topped out in July. So this was like an early indicator. And now we're seeing a bottoming. That is really, really bullish, my friends. We're getting really close to getting that monthly swing to tell you semis are going to start outperforming the broader index. All right, we'll move to Dixie. This thing has been careening lower, and we'll talk about what are the longer term implications here. So we are holding a little swing low here. So this looks like a daily cycle low after 28 days, incredibly bearish. Look at that. Topped out on day 11, and then the bottom just fell out. So that means we are now on day 9. And since we are in a longer term bearish pattern, this has the potential to be a left translated daily cycle. So we're already on day 9, which means we could see this thing roll over pretty soon. And in terms of weekly, so this is important. This looks like a weekly cycle low at week 30. This thing made a weekly swing, right? It needed to close above 99.94, and we did that, right? And so you could see a world where we get another week of upside, right? A little 2-week rally, and then next week we resume down, something like that, right? And maybe even more dramatic, right? That these candles are even bigger. But the point is, this weekly cycle is probably not going to rally for 16 weeks the way this one did, right? And so that is the implication. That would probably be bullish for stocks, but I mean, correlations are starting to break down a little bit. So I think better to judge everything on its own merits. Longer term, right? Like this price action has always looked kind of fuzzy. We have this major low here on month 30 after this big top. And then we've just kind of been chopping around ever since. We made a high here on month 18. It's now month 22. And so I will label this tentatively here, right? Right, and this is month 18, right? So you have the potential that this is, a new bearish long-term cycle, right? Right? Like this was a short one, or this is all one big one and it's bearish. It doesn't really matter. The point is that like this was a meager little attempt at a rally, and then you went false breakout above these highs, and now we're careening lower. So right now, this is just a big inside candle on the monthly chart, right? Not really doing much. But the bigger implication is that this whole rally is going to get, well, not that this whole rally is going to get unwound, but more of it is. Because so far you had this gigantic rally, you had this big crash, but then it ended, right? Like you got this much of a move. Let's see, how much of the move did we take? Did we retrace, I guess? Boom. And then we got all the way down here. Well, that's definitely more than 50%. Okay. And so that's going to be something to watch. Very big implications there. All right, we move on to the 10-year treasury yield. So this one, again, that correlation with the Dixie seems to have broken. So this bottomed earlier, week 28, and now we're actually holding, right? Like these last 3 weeks have just been inside the range of this candle and on the upper end, and now we have this little low. So things get really simple here. You got to hold above the low here. So that's 4.112. And that sets you up that this is week 4 of a new weekly cycle. And this seems to be, again, looking more bullish than Dixie was, whereas they were both kind of moving in lockstep for the longest time. And in terms of your daily cycle, so we have this high on day 4. We're on day 18 here. So similar to stocks, actually, with the implication that we would make a higher high above here, you would imagine, right? That's not your daily cycle high, if this is going to be a bullish cycle, obviously. Okay, so that's Dixie. What about oil? So oil is below $60. So we've talked about how we have this shelf here, that this thing has not broken below, and then we broke below it pretty aggressively, and then we bounced, and now we're back, right? And so this is probably the end of the little weekly cycle rally we have. And this has really big implications. So it's really simple, right? This thing has to hold above that 55 level, or, let's see. What does the monthly chart tell us? Wow, you could see a world where, oh, I see, yeah. Structurally, something like the low 50s. And then below that, you have the mid 40s. Yikes. Okay, so that's going to be something to watch. TLT. So TLT has been choppy since this high on week 11. This is 12, 13, 14, week 15. So week 15. After this really long, not much to do here, right? And then think about the daily. This thing, pretty simple here, has to hold above 87.54. It looks like we're continuing a weekly cycle decline, though. What about TBT? So TBT doing the opposite, has to hold above 33.97, but that looks actually like it's trying to rally in the weekly cycle. All right, we're gonna close out here with crypto and then precious metals. So most importantly, Bitcoin looks like it's week 3 of a new weekly cycle. ETH in a very similar position, like just in that, in that it's a new weekly cycle. But look at this downdraft. Bitcoin's still the place to be versus ETH. Gold, very importantly, starting a weekly cycle decline. It had to cool off at some point. That was unavoidable. We have a swing high by closing the week below 32.60. So that becomes your line in the sand, 32.60 on the daily, and on the weekly, excuse me. And on the daily, that swing high happened below 33.67, basically. And so you can see this thing moving lower. You would expect the next area that you might see a bounce is around 31.68 is my guess. Silver is looking weaker, and that makes sense. If gold is declining, silver is going to be getting clobbered. And so for silver, you want to see this thing, like at this point, you want to see this thing hold this next pivot here. So call it 30.82. That might be where you see some kind of bounce. For the miners, so at this point, we're in daily cycle and most likely weekly cycle decline. I would stay away. For the miners, the weekly cycle, the weekly swing high is active below 47.77. And so you need to break back above that to get any bullish signs. And you probably see this thing test the 40, let's see here. Probably the low 40s, right? Like, especially, if we're in weekly cycle decline, that wouldn't be crazy. And finally, let's look at natural gas. This thing yes, okay. So this thing looks like it's waking up in a new weekly cycle. Look at that thing. Oof. So we had a nice a nice daily swing that I tweeted about, which got some nice follow through on that right here. Right, so this was your tiny little swing, like a baby little swing, and then you got your big follow through, more follow through, little consolidation, and now more. And so we're probably early in a new weekly cycle for natural gas. That's bullish. So those are the updates. Thanks for watching.